Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two emerging-ish screenwriters try to work out what makes great screenplays work, except in this episode where we're most definitely not doing that.
This is our annual Backmatter episode, a looser format where Stu and I allow ourselves to leave homework to one side and just talk about more.
We move away from the pseudo-empirical to just into the pseudo.
So we talk about career stuff, we talk about writing stuff, process, all those kind of things. So there is less homework to do and more, hopefully, easy listening. So anyway, our topics for today include a little bit of housekeeping where we mull over what the next year of Draft Zero will look like, and we're more than happy to take feedback and episode ideas, particularly for our 100th episode. Mm-hmm. Then we are going to talk about first acts based on a
listener question, and it's a good example of where it's our gut feeling. You know, we might talk about a couple examples. Prey was something we talked about in the context of how first acts are changing, but it's going to be more, I mean, it's all opinion-based, but even more opinion-based. It's an op-ed as opposed to,
pseudo-academia?
Yeah, I don't know.
We're going to look at generating new material versus working on older projects, and potentially going to discuss how to maintain hope in a career as fickle as ours. And then, yes, ending with the classic Star Wars discussion of Keobi and Andor.
Yeah, for those who have not listened to an annual Backmatter episode, generally for a period of time, there was a Star Wars film coming out every year. They've now moved into television, but every year, and we would basically pick it apart, actually, because we're like, hey, we don't have to pretend to love things. This is Disney. They don't need our praise, so we would actually be a little bit more critical. In this case, all our criticism is going to be aimed at the dumpster fire of Keobi.
There are still some things I loved in Keobi.
Interesting. Okay, I look forward to that broad, freely-wheeling discussion, but it's interesting because I've been looking at it through the lens of when we were talking about, like, how do you maintain raised stakes in biopics, and prequels are an interesting case of, they're not obviously biopics, but they've got the same fundamental problem, which is the outcome.
But it's interesting because Keobi and Andor both have that same problem, and one handled it way better than another.
Oh, yeah. That's why I think they're worth talking about. Anyway, housekeeping.
So first of all, thanks to all our amazing Patreons. For those of you who don't know, Draft Zero is brought to you more often by our patrons. We're currently sitting around $200 an episode.
50, maybe a little bit less. It fluctuates. Backers.
And just know that money does get Stu and I to commit to commit is a strong word, but it does get us to release about 10 episodes a year.
Just like 20 hours of content, let's be fair.
Yes, a lot of content. But why we set the threshold for monthly releases and then fortnightly releases so high is the only way we
How high is high? It's about $600 a month. And that's not to pay us. So fundamentally, like at the moment, we've got, Chris Walker, who we mentioned, edits most of the episodes most of the time. And we have a Zoe who's on the social media team, and they're getting spare change.
Which is significantly more than what we're getting.
Yes, that is true. But we're getting priceless exposure. But the idea was to set up a rate that would allow us to pay a professional to edit the podcast basically on closer to our schedule than their schedule.
Yeah.
Because if it's coming out at 2 hours, it is pretty much a day to 2 days worth of work to get an episode with excerpts down to something to restructure it. Chris does really... If you think our episodes are rambling, you should do the recordings, because Chris does a great job restructuring the episodes. And basically he was the listener first. He's like, yeah, I don't care about that discussion. That bit's good, but I want it earlier. So he does a bit of restructuring.
He's got great taste about knowing when we're not worth listening to.
Yes. But to be able to commit monthly, we need a back-end team that will be able to turn around it as quickly as possible. So even if we recorded it on the 28th of the month, that they will know that they're getting paid a fair wage to be able to deliver it by the end of the month, right? And you can only do that when you pay people appropriately.
Yeah.
So that's why that goal is still so high.
But we are incredibly chuffed that anyone is paying us any money to make these at all.
We've had people just tip us using the link tree, which is, people have also bought the merchandise, the shirts and stuff like that, it all just basically goes into the same pool of
Stu's PayPal account.
Yeah. My Draft Zero business PayPal account. Let's be clear here.
I have a lot of faith in Stu because I'm like the Craig Mason of this side of the podcast. I have very little insights into the finances.
For all my whoopity-doo, I'm late. Oh, I'm so weird. I'm like the fucking Gandalf here, and he's just... I was going to... Aragon? I don't want to flatter you. You're not Aragon. You're
Radagast.
Samwise?
Oh, loyal to a fault.
Good at cooking.
Yes. All right, I'll take it.
knows how to do a lot of things with potatoes. The things this man can do with potatoes.
Anyway, beyond our Patreon, what are we looking at in 2023? We are very solid on our first 3 episodes.
I don't know whether the third will actually be within the first 3 run, but I think it should happen.
Yes.
So we'll jump to our schedule. So we have already basically got the wheels in motion to record 2 episodes on ensembles. And this is an interesting question. It's even worth talking about it now. It's like, hey, hang on, what do we mean by ensembles? But like the dividing line is between films whose genres conventionally require them to be an ensemble. So a murder mystery, you're going to be looking at Glass Onion. We're going to be looking at like team sports films. So probably doing Pitch Perfect, maybe doing a family drama. If we can decide that we will do 4 films, maybe like a slasher, like a film where the character's getting killed off, right? Is kind of ensembles 1. And ensembles 2 will be films whose conventionally are not ensembles. So we definitely know that we're doing Riders of Justice, right? Which is this basically, it's dadcore, but it's like a subversion of the dadcore films. Dadcore films like Taken, to use kind of like the trope maker, is all about him being like a lone wolf. So turning like the film about this dadcore lone wolf.
Well, the revenge movie is typically like the one person going on a revenge mission.
Surely there's probably war films that are like group war, revenge, collective.
But I imagine, like we've said, war films, those are usually ones that like mission films. Like you think of Saving Private Ryan.
Heist films are all a form of mission film.
Yeah. So why are we looking at ensembles?
Well, we're working on a project that has a large ensemble cast. So you can see we're once again talking about features, ensembles, because, you know, features from a storytelling point of view have got, like, it's all about economy, right? You know, I think...
Well, your biggest constraint is time.
Yeah. The 4 things you're balancing as a writer in a story is character. You're balancing plot, so the events of the story. What I call micro-plotting, which I think is like... action set pieces are micro-plotting, but also they can be scare sequences and spooky things.
Oh, but even like a scene where a lot happens in a scene, like... Yeah,
micro-plotting for me is a very specific thing. A detective thing, just going into the crime scene and looking into it. It's all the stuff where the film actually kind of slows down because it's part of the genre. And then you balance that with the kind of the narrative, how the film is being told, right? And so in a feature film, that's what you're trying to do in 90 minutes or 100 minutes. And when you start adding in multiple characters, it's like, how do you service multiple characters and effectively doing all those things? And I think something like Glass Onion is really interesting because it services a lot of characters. It has quite a lot of plot. It definitely has a bit of micro-plotting going on, and it has a kind of a more complex narrative structure. I'm saying this before Christmas because I actually saw it at the cinemas. And so we're doing Riders of Justice. We're going to be doing The Woman King, which is kind of like an historical epic / action movie, which are interesting because sometimes they can fall into like ensemble stories. Sometimes they're more Braveheart and focused on the great man of history kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, there is no great man, there is only the great many. That's my socialist.
You go, Stu. But to me, like the whole point of looking at this is when you're under this time constraint, that's your lack of resource and you're having to service multiple characters. Because I think we're trying to, in that run, distinguish films that just have a lot of characters but still follow like that single protagonist pathway where people don't need those other characters to be fully fleshed out. They can come and go and service the plot or character development or what have you. But particularly ensemble films, like I'm basically trying to learn character tools, efficient character tools.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for us to talk about efficient character tools, but also have that conversations about, efficiency is kind of the resources that you have at hand. And so then we'll probably build from ensembles into something we've been talking about for a while, which is hyperlinked cinema, which is kind of a more academic term, but it's those kind of films like Contagion or Babel, Now that's going to be the film whose pronunciation I destroy. Love Actually, that followed multiple groups of characters that kind of connected by more of a thematic thread than them existing within the same plot. So rather than them all being affected by the plot, they're being actually affected largely by the theme. And so it's going to be interesting to see what that brings out. But we might not do all three in a row. We're definitely doing Ensembles 1 and 2 with Mel joining us for those. And then Hyperlink might happen later in the year. We might decide, we've done too many big group characters. Because another episode we're going to do that's going to be exciting, it's been kind of in the works for a while, but we're going to be doing fictional podcasts, partly because Chaz has been working on one. I'm just taking an EP credit, that's it, and my 5%, that's my level of involvement.
5% of nothing is nothing.
Totally. In fact, I'm going to work it in such a way that you're going to end up owing me money, Chaz.
Well, that's the studio profit accounting method.
Friends of the podcasts, Lauren and Meegs, just released an amazing podcast, comedy podcast, Starship. It's now Starship Q-Star.
Yeah. So great. We were privileged, I feel, to be a part of a minor part of the development process.
Well, they basically based a performance on my performance of script reading.
They brought the pilot script into our writers' workshop, and we did a live read, and so it's just been so amazing. If a queer comedic take on Star Trek is your jam, and listen to it, and if it's not your jam, it should be, so you should listen to it. But we're going to have them on the podcast to talk about writing, what they've learned transitioning from screenwriting into fictional writing. We've got a couple of other writers who've got similar projects. I'm not going to say who they are yet, in case it all falls apart. A team of writers that have worked on an Audible series that we're hopefully having on the show, and then also another one who's worked on a one-person kind of audio drama. Anyway, we want to do fictional podcasts, audio drama. It's a new area. A lot of screenwriters getting into it, and we just want to learn from other people's mistakes. Yes. But to be clear, the reason why I'm doing a fictional podcast, as much as I do listen to them, we make podcasts as well, is that I'm getting very sick and tired of the writing screenplay after screenplay that doesn't get made. And I want to adopt the I'm just going to fucking make something attitude, but I want to make something super cool. And I can't afford to make my space pirate murder mystery, even a short film version, but I can afford to do a narrative podcast version of it.
So I think this is me filling in the gaps, but it feels like if you're a screenwriter, a short film doesn't necessarily show off what you can do as a writer as opposed to something longer form, right? So if you've got X amount of money, you can make a short film that's only like 5 or 7 minutes. You may not direct it. A lot of screenwriters do direct it to greater or lesser success. Sometimes they're coming and directing, never having much experience. Sometimes they find directors, but the fact is they only get a 5 or 10 minute thing out of it for that spend. Or they can go, I can make an entire series. If you look at what they did with Starship Q-Star, it's like because they're 30-minute episodes and there's like 6 or is it 8?
More, yeah. I think they said it was over 200 minutes of content.
Right, which is a huge amount. So it's longer than a feature film. It's an entire series, and it certainly is a testament to Meegs and Lauren ability as writers.
Yeah.
And then obviously because Lauren directed
producers.
And Meegs produced it. Lauren was already a great director. That's how I know her because I went to film school with her. But it lets them show off their storytelling chops. It's something in longer form. So I think it is something that is becoming more and more attractive to screenwriters who are looking for that minimum viable product to talk about, I'm connecting us to what we talked about last year.
I mean, I think I've spoken a number of years about turning this one script into a podcast, but I am actually now 3 episodes deep. And one of the things I'm going to learn and from these other writers is like episode length and things like that, because I've kind of sort of naturally fallen. So the previous script I had is like dictating where the episode breaks are, and I'm not entirely sure whether I should wrangle that or rework that for the format.
And also there's questions around intercutting, right? Like a classic, intercutting between 2 locations and the audio, the George Lucas thing where one location's this color and another location's the other color, so you can go fast and fast and fast. And it just sounds like it doesn't work in an audio film, that audiences get disorientated, that it's harder for audiences to relate to characters because they're lacking a pictorial element to identify who a character is. It's purely auditory. I mean, I think the form really suits you, Chaz, because you're someone who watches TV, listens to TV while playing on their iPhone. So, it's effectively how you consume television anyway.
I'm withholding the profanity. Okay, so we've fictional podcast, audio drama, hyperlink cinema, ensembles.
Gosh, that feels like it's most of the year already.
We would love to revisit dialogue in a more monologues and rhetoric point of view, because we've done lots of dialogue work of characters bouncing off each other.
I mean, in a way, what's interesting about monologues is the characters often it's still dialogue. They're speaking to the audience. They may be speaking to themselves, but that's still them speaking to another. But I guess it's the lack of the response.
I mean, a voiceover could fit in this as well.
Oh, yeah. Monologues, voiceover, and then, but also the rhetoric, the kind of like poetic tools.
To me, because often you want to be in a scene where you've got one character who wants an outcome and other characters in the scene who don't want to do it. And ultimately, sometimes there's no action that character can take. It has to be dialogue. It has to be rhetoric. You know, it's so more recently, and it's not all that recent anymore, but the first Guardians of the Galaxy, where Peter convinces everyone else to die trying to save Xandar, right? And it's not long, but it is just purely through dialogue.
Okay, that's the way you're thinking through it. Great. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, because I'm now going to voiceovers, right? And the idea that when characters talk to the audience is because they want something. And I mentioned that before, the Fleabag and the Frank Underwood speaking to the audience because they want the audience to like them.
And Spontaneous has VO as well.
Oh, yeah, I love Spontaneous. Which would lead us into tone. I'm really keen to get an episode on tone. We'll see if we get like Brian Duffield. But I do think it'd be interesting to revisit tone. But look, this is the interesting question because we've got a lot of, like, we've had stuff on this list that's kicking around for a while. Some of it gets earlier, some of it gets later. Originally, we were talking last year, focusing on character journeys, right? And different ways to think about character journeys. Do you think we got through that? Did you feel like...
I feel like we're still missing one episode that I wanted to do, but I feel like we've attacked character journeys through a lot of different lenses, and I'm feeling a lot more satisfied on that basis. Like, biopics, weirdly, we did a lot of character work. I feel like we've scratched a lot of that itch. I still want to do what I guess I call unchanging heroes, where like the steadfast hero. And is it as simple as just the world changes around them, or are there more subtle ways that you can do that?
Yeah, that the world changes in response to what they...
Like Macbeth. Macbeth doesn't change, and that's his downfall.
Yeah, but he still has a moment of anagnosis. Yeah, we did do a lot of character.
We've done a lot of work on... Because I was writing this biopic, and I still am, I've written versions of it, all right? It's not like I've been working on the same script for 3 years. But it's that idea of when the audience knows the plot outcome and the character doesn't really change that much, how do you keep the audience engaged?
Yeah, okay. Because I would feel like it's hard to articulate. If I was trying to look at the area that I wanted to become more consciously competent, and then particularly then that whole unconscious competence. Do you know this whole thing about my saying words? Okay, it's worth, because it does speak to Draft Sarah, and it's an interesting thing for people to think about in their screenwriting and where they kind of end up getting stuck in the middle. So when we first start out doing something, we are unconsciously incompetent.
Are we getting to the Ira Glass?
Kind of. It's similar, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced, right? It's got a little bit more of a scale to it. So when we start out something, we're unconsciously incompetent, but very quickly we become consciously incompetent, right? And a lot of screenwriters, when they first start learning screenwriting, it's like something like, oh, that's what formatting is. That's what the thing is. And so there's a sudden, like, massively, you climb that hill to conscious incompetence really quickly. So you actually feel a great level of like adrenaline rush of like, I am learning how to screenwrite.
I guess achievement, like endorphins or dopamine, like you get...
Yeah, you're going to map that, and that shift from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence happens very quickly. And then the next stage is conscious competence, right? So you go unconscious incompetence to conscious...
Conscious incompetence?
Yes, when you're aware of what you don't know.
Okay, yep. And then you go to conscious competence.
Right, where you can be more, still kind of the stage that we're in, right? It's a big stage where...
So we know what we're working on.
Yeah, and what you're good at, and you're and then the level where you want to go to is unconscious competence, right? Where you just do things. And I'm going to relate this to sword fighting, because I did a terrible tournament in October. My worldwide ranking dropped by like 500 fucking places. My mind was not in it. And given how few people do historical fencing, on a
That's all
competitive
big
level,
drop.
it's like I'm ranked 500 in side sword, which sounds good, but there's like 600 people that do it worldwide. So, it's a very small pool. But the people that are really good at it, like they no longer have to be aware of what their body is doing.
Yeah.
So they actually look at it at a much higher level. They'll be in a match and you can see them going, or they watch someone and go, okay, this is how I beat them. And then they just execute. And that transitional stage is a lot harder. There is ultimately a level of consciousness, but the foundational skills to do the thing are no longer.
You stop thinking about it. Like you just know the answer or how to.
Yeah, we do that with formatting. Like I don't have to sweat now in terms of writing a script, and I know how to pace myself. I know how to okay, it'll take me this long to write a script, and this is how I pace it out, and I've got the processes. The thing that I now want to become more consciously competent at, to use like a John August word, is kind of magnetic characters. The characters that you kind of really have an understanding of how audiences connect with characters and be in control of that. Because otherwise I think we fall into cliches.
Yeah.
That we go, oh, we need to make the character more likable, or we make them funny and all that stuff. And I think screenwriting and storytelling is more sophisticated than that. And I'd love to do an episode that works on thinking about how to make. We did Unlikable Protagonists twice, way back at the beginning, but it'd be interesting to revisit stories that have more unusual structures around their main characters.
Yeah.
Right.
And, this focus on character is born of the fact that certainly in my writing, and certainly when we write together, but I'm not going to speak for you with your other writers, is that I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on plotting, pacing, white space, structure, those kind of things. And often the things that we're working in, draft out, is getting the audience, the readers, to align with how we see the characters. Because there's often a disconnect in our writing between how we see our characters and how the readers perceive them.
Very common problem for writers, because we spend more time in our heads with the characters than ultimately the audience do. So they see the tip of the iceberg, but we've literally sculpted the whole iceberg.
And we could potentially keep going on, not to forget structure entirely. We've got, I think the ensemble stuff is going to go into larger structural questions, but we've also probably will continue looking through endings and different lenses. So we've got down here, that binary choice of the hero's choice at the end. But then there was also potentially looking at films through the Michael Arndt climax. I can't say climax.
He's got there's the decisive act. He talks about this decisive act thing. Yeah, because we talked about it with Everything Everywhere all at once, and now we've forgotten it.
Yes.
But yeah, what was interesting is he saw the decisive act as not necessarily being for the main character.
Interesting. So if we found a few examples of that where it's not for the main character, that would be...
Yeah. So in Michael Arndt's analysis, it's actually the decisive act is Han Solo coming back. It's Han Solo's decision to join the fight that is actually the decisive act that turns the tide.
Yeah, because talking about steadfast characters, I don't feel that Luke changes that much in Star Wars. In the same way, I don't think Harry Potter changes that much. They learn a whole bunch of fucking shit, but who they are as people... I think Luke would have trusted the Force at the beginning of the film as much as he did at the end. They never showed him, doubting the Force in Star Wars. Harry Potter, they never show him not showing courage in the face of adversity. Ultimately, who they are as characters does not change. What they learn changes.
I mean, it raises a lot of interesting things about human nature. You start getting into that, is what is change, and people just revealing, the more things change, the more they stay the same. As in, the things that change show you what is malleable, and the stuff that doesn't change shows you what is the core essence. So, this character, in hindsight, it's easy to go, this character doesn't change, because what we're actually doing is by changing the external elements of them, we're revealing their core character, right? Which is that Luke cares about his friends and all those kinds of things, right? And that never...
that gets more interesting in Empire Strikes Back, where he's actually put in a position of going, here is the path to become the Jedi, or you can go and care for your friends. At least there's a conflicted choice, but never in Star Wars is there a choice between trusting the Force and
which is
saving the galaxy.
Which is why the biggest change to the Luke Skywalker character is actually in the Force Awakens and not The Last Jedi, which is that Luke has chosen to isolate himself from everyone, which is character development.
Yes.
Right? And it is interesting character development. It's just done entirely off screen. And then people really resisted about learning it in hindsight. And I actually now wonder if people would have been more responsive to that changing Luke if they saw it in real time. Because I think there is a difference between experiencing something with a character than us learning about it in hindsight.
Fair enough. Is that enough? Are people excited about 2023? We will be very open to ideas for other episodes that you guys are interested in. And in particular, we are 5 episodes away from our 100th episode. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, my original plan was to I had a notion of us going to Austin and doing a live 100th episode, probably in like a cupboard somewhere. This is your audience of 3. Thanks, Julio. Thanks, Chris. But we'll probably actually hit 100 in the middle of the year, unless we're shooting something, which would be exciting, or making an audio podcast.
Either way, like I'm hoping to just have the audio podcast happening without me having to be heavily involved.
I think that is overly optimistic.
Yes, I agree. But it is my goal.
I mean, if you want to spend more money,
yes,
it becomes more possible.
I will spend more money. I'm in the luxurious position where I have more access to money than I have access to time.
All right, speaking about resource constraints. Well, I think in some ways what we had there was a long first act. I was trying to transition to
it was nice. I liked it.
So we had a reader question. Do you have the question at hand, Chaz?
Oh, God. It was on Twitter, wasn't it? No, is the answer. I do not have it at hand.
Keyboard. Internet searching music. Okay, I found it. Zachawat.
Well done.
Listener Isaac wrote to us on Twitter and said, not a Backmatter chat, but sorry, mate, we're doing it as Backmatter, but I feel there's a significant shortening of first acts in films. He was wanting something more empirical, and we're not going to do the empirical thing because it feels like it's a fucking thesis about whether or not first acts have become shorter and whether or not that's anecdotal. And we said we'll do an informal chat about it because we've had some experience with a couple of projects and first acts and our own kind of becoming more consciously competent or more consciously aware of what's going on in first acts, which is I do think there has been a change with the nature of streaming. And we've got friends that write for Netflix, and like the emphasis that Netflix puts on those first 5 minutes of the pilot scripts is huge. This is not necessarily their formula, and maybe people can look it up. I'm not going to, but it's this idea of like, if you make it through the first 5 minutes of an episode, you'll watch the first 15. If you make it through the first 15, you're more likely to watch it to the end of the first episode. If you make it through the first episode, it's something like their next milestone is episode 3. If you make it through episode 3, you'll probably watch the whole show. Yeah. Right?
I mean, putting it obviously, the advent of streaming has led to an easing of consumer choice where you're not in a movie theater. Yeah. Where you're locked in. You haven't gone to Blockbuster and rented a movie and you'd have to go back to Blockbuster to get a different movie.
Sorry, I was bored within the first 5 minutes. Can you take this DVD back? It'll take you 20 minutes to drive to Blockbuster.
So now with the advent of streaming, it's like pressures on the storytellers. I think there is a real pressure on the luxury of a slow burn first act is really hard. Like we're writing a horror movie at the moment where we're heavily referencing a whole lot of Australian films, and the continual feedback we're getting is shorten your first act, shorten your first act, shorten your first act.
And but also, where's the character development going?
But then they'll say something like, like in Wolf Creek, and we're like, no one died in Wolf Creek for 45 fucking minutes.
Like that opening 40 minutes is super tense. They set up the tension purely in text on screen about the number of people I think it's the number of people that go missing.
Yeah.
Right? And then like based on a true story or whatever it is. And then they're just in this slightly uneasy bit of off-putting music, and you are just tense for the first 45 minutes before anything happens. And it doesn't feel like you would have that kind of structure in a modern slasher film. I mean, Halloween, sometimes the first kill can be in the cold open, and part of the reason that the classic horror cold open is a kill is because then it buys you 20 minutes or 30 minutes of setup.
I feel Halloween ends, like it did have a cold open, but it wasn't a Michael-oriented cold open. It was a character cold open. And I feel like it had a long first act, which is going to a point we made off mic is, I think, original stories that are going to have the majority of their life on a streaming service. Theatrical releases are becoming almost non-existent for independent film.
Yeah.
They are under pressure to get the story going, or at least lay down the promise of the premise or whatever you want to talk about. Like, they are under real pressure up front. They can't afford a slow burn first act. But I feel like established IP, where you've got people who are going to settle in, you have that audience trust, I feel the filmmakers still have the luxury of longer first acts. It would have been a different form of tension. Like, Stephen Cleary does a great analysis on different types of fear that you can play with in relation to narrative point of view. And I think we've talked about it in a different podcast. But I think in horror movies, like long first acts, you're just generally playing with tension rather than where you're doing this intercutting, or, fear in the present is very different. Like, you've got jump scares or gore or other things. So they're feeling the pressure to have those big horror moments earlier in that film.
Yeah, and the point is, it's a conversation about first acts, because that's a first act that I feel is the franchise, just looking at the franchise, has changed the expectation of what that structure is, right? Like, if an Alien film comes along now, and there has been Prometheus and Alien Covenant, but it feels like whatever we're going to see next is going to end up having the alien appear
in the first 5 minutes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you kind of get a little bit of that, like Alien Resurrection has a little bit of that moment and stuff like that, but they're not as patient. Isaac, coming back to that, a question was like, oh, is this related to like kind of like the blacklist model? And he's talking about a model rather than the website, a script coverage and ranking, this kind of like competitive screenwriting, this idea that screenwriting is like a competition. It's like a sport more than it is an art.
But he's talking about the reward scheme, right? Like, are scripts that have banger first 5 pages doing better than ones that do a slow burn and something big happens on page 30? Which I'm not sure about what he's saying about the blacklist model. I remember the year that I did relatively well at Austin, I then went and found the one that won Austin Screenplay, and I got through to, I think, page 15 and nothing had happened. If we're talking about incentive schemes, screenplay competitions, they force the readers to read the whole script.
Appear as if they've read the whole script.
They need to, because they get such bad press if the coverage they get back feels like they haven't read the whole script. Anyway, if you've got a script where you're looking for having that slow burn first act, I think it's harder to pull off. You and I are certainly finding it harder. We set out to write a horror movie where we wanted it to start out as a rom-com, essentially, that got interrupted by a horror movie. We've just almost lost the entirety of that.
I think you're being overly negative about what we've ended up doing.
No, we're happy with the choices we're making, but
we had to add a cold open.
Yeah. And move all the rom-com element to like a flashback and shorten it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like you get into the new world at page 12. It's like cold open, death, characters in the new world, flashback to what we had for the first 12 pages.
I think, answering Zach's question, I don't think it's which is kind of what I think you're saying, is that there's a whole bunch of incentives throughout the industry about making the first 15 or so pages really grabby, because you're talking about a industry in which everyone is time poor. So they want to know that your script is going to be worth their while within 15 pages if they give that. I have read for redacted. I've read for competitions where I do not have to finish reading the script. I won't say who they're for, but it's essentially like, if you can't finish reading it, then it doesn't deserve to win or be considered. So if they lose you in the first page, put it aside. And I've had scripts, when I first started, I was like, no, I'll give them 5 pages. And now I'm pretty ruthless because I've got a stack of scripts that I'm not being paid to read, that I'm like, mate, you've lost me in the first page. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the business, right? That you're talking about time poor people, that you need to grab their attention and be, remarkable or hold them in such a way, And there are people that can do that with just the power of their language. The opening of Alien is absolutely hypnotic, but it is hypnotic on the page. Like, the script that was written by, Dan O'Brien and then by Walter Hill is a fantastic read. And even though, quote unquote, nothing happens, the read itself has the magical quality that Ridley Scott brought on screen. So if you're going to do the slower first act, maybe the problem is our slow first act just wasn't that.
Wasn't well written enough.
Or it didn't indicate, like it wasn't correlated enough with the promise of the premise. We're going to be talking about Writers of Justice in our Ensemble episode. And there's a big turning point on page 30, but the inciting incident is like 4 minutes in. Like, it absolutely just pops
And maybe this is, again, pure speculation without doing any research here. But I think possibly even in franchise films where people have got the luxury of a captive audience and a longer first act and that kind of thing, they are still very quite sequence-based. So I think that inciting incident, if you're on Thor 4, the inciting incident will feel a lot like the end of a first act. Because everyone knows who Thor is, and they're like, let's go on the mission.
Oh, but I would actually argue the inciting incident of Thor 4 is Gore the God Butcher getting the sword.
Yeah.
So it actually happens in cold open.
But Thor becoming aware of
yeah.
God the Butcher is like minute 10. Just, again, where the fuck is a first act? We're talking in, constructs that do not necessarily apply movie to movie. But I think what we're talking about is a distinct pressure to grab audiences sooner. Audiences are less patient.
Yeah, the end of the first act's harder because, like, when you come back to the 5-act structure, which we've talked about, that the first act or sequence is the exposition of the pre-existing conflict, right? And then there's the inciting incident or the complication to that pre-existing conflict, which is Romeo and Juliet falling in love, right? That's the inciting incident. But yeah, what is that transition to more complications? So, yes, Isaac, I think you're right. First acts are getting shortened. Maybe not they're necessarily getting shortened, but you kind of have to put a certain kind of wow, to kind of need to clearly identify what your genre is, possibly put your star up front, something that is going to grab the audience and do that on the page.
It might not be that first acts are getting shorter. It might be that inciting incidents are getting closer to
the start.
Yeah. These are arbitrary things that an analysis of the film won't tell you what the writer of the film necessarily saw as being those points anyway. So
authorial intention never survives contact with the enemy, which is the audience.
Sure. But, to use Craig Mason's terms, what we're talking about is analysis, not generation. So we don't know what tools help that writer generate that material.
I would slightly disagree with him because what we're talking about is a feeling that someone as an audience member is saying, I am feeling that first acts are getting shortened. And what they are feeling, I think, is that maybe that there is less development of character and world before the story starts, right? And so it feels like I'm not learning who these characters are, in which case it's a deconstructive tool. But for me, because I'm so audience focused, it's about what is the audience with this trend, what is the result in terms of how it affects the audience emotionally. And then beginning like Pavlov's dog, where audiences are now, because producers and small p producers, just less filmmakers are shortening first acts. Our audience is getting used to shortened first acts, and therefore it's actually becoming harder to do longer first acts because they're being trained into it.
I think cinema literacy is also changing, right? Like, I'm sure I'm going to attract a lot of disdain for this, but I love Westerns, and quite late in life, I went to the Peckinpah Westerns that, supposedly changed everything. But because I'd seen a lot of Westerns made after Peckinpah's Westerns, I'd seen what he changed about the genre absorbed already. And so when I saw his stuff, I'm like, well, this doesn't really feel that iconic or new or different.
I think that literacy, maybe.
I mean, we are able to absorb story at a faster rate.
Yes.
Like, Anna can't even sit through the original Superman, the 1979 Superman credits because they go too long.
Yeah, I mean, she's not wrong.
But that amazing John Williams score.
But I mean, that's also a different type of that's when people were still, you probably didn't have 15 minutes of trailers. So the idea of people were still filing into the cinema while the credits were going, right, was like part of the style that you kind of loaded your credits up front because people were still entering.
I mean, I watched Elf with my kids the other day, and it was the first time I'd seen Elf. And Elf has a prologue, and then it goes into head credits with a little animation. And the kids were like, is the movie over? Because they hadn't seen head credits before. So they were like, did we just watch the prologue and now we're in the credits and the movie's all done?
I mean, I think it hints to our discussion with Andor, because I think what was interesting about Andor, look, and I actually feel the weird thing is that television has slowed down. Films are getting faster and television is this weird, overtired, it's both way too fast and also way too slow. We do not need 2 hours episodes of TV. But Andor is really interesting because they dropped the first 3 episodes at once and I watched them and I'm like, this really feels like they were just a pilot. And it was an hour and a half pilot that they broke into 3 episodes to make it more palatable, right? But a lot of people were turned off by the pacing of it. And I wonder if it actually would have been better from a psychological point of view, going, we're doing an hour and a half pilot, and then it's just going to be an hour episodes after this. Because everyone's like, oh, it's only 30-minute episodes. And then they all became 45 minutes after that anyway, right? So it was kind of misleading in a number of levels.
Worked for you and me, but it was the lowest grossing, or lowest viewed, grossing is not the right word, Star Wars show.
Shame. If you haven't watched Andor, best thing you can do for your screenwriting career is stop listening to this podcast and watching Andor. Fantastic.
But before we get into Keobi versus Andor, we like to, in these Backmatter episodes, be ever so slightly vulnerable and personal and talk about...
You're vulnerable and I'm personable. That's how it works.
So we've got a couple of different topics here. The one that I propose, because it's one that I'm really struggling with, is when you are time constrained, and that's a resource, is that pressure to generate new material versus working on older projects. Because when I was more of a baby writer, I would write a script, rework it until a number of readers said it was okay, and then I would submit it for screenplay competitions, place in those, and then I would write a new script.
Yeah, you wouldn't get stuck into doing development. Yeah. Development wasn't something you had to deal with as a baby writer.
Yeah. And so I would keep on moving on because what I wanted was that breakthrough thing, right? So the way that I saw it is the best way to achieve that breakthrough thing was to just keep writing more and more and more.
And you probably learnt more from each new project than you did by redeveloping it.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I'm at a stage where certain projects have a certain amount of attachments or interest from different people. And so kind of like, I should work on this thing more than working on something completely new. And there's also the fact that this is possibly unique to me, but I don't think it is. I find writing a first draft of something way harder than rewriting.
I don't think it is unique to you because I think it's more than just time. You're talking about cognitive load, right? Like you're talking about like the actual mental effort. It's like, you know, I've had an incredibly busy, quote unquote, day job. Like my last 6 months have just been fucking mad, you know, for good and worse. I had a friend die, moving house, like a lot of work going on, which has been great.
Travel.
Insane amounts of travel. Basically, if I get time off, I'm like, I'm going to watch TV or spend time with my partner or
play video games.
Do
input.
But not even input, like literally like
downtime.
Yeah, unwind, you know, like dealing with burnout, right?
Yeah.
And part of me gets the whole like, oh, I've had a whole day off. I can't believe I've done fuck all. You know, I should be writing a new project. But the cognitive load of that is so high, right? It really is.
But you and I, we've got a follow-up project, like the second thing that we'll write together, that I think we're both really excited about. But we haven't touched it since the beginning of this year because we've done rewrites on other projects that both together and separately. And then I've been focusing on this podcast thing because I'm like, I thought that would be easy. That would be one of the key learnings is writing for a visual medium is very different from writing for an auditory only medium.
All I do is delete the action lines. We've got the dialogue.
So yeah, I feel like this year, usually each year I've got one new, like brand new first draft.
Yeah.
And I don't have that this year.
Yes, and I don't either. And I've got a list of things.
I do think there is good to balance generating new material with working on old material because for me, working on old material is not the right way to put it, but rewriting, because it's so much easier for me, I can duck out of my busy life and rewrite a lot easier than I can.
Do you think you're talking about the difference between shallow work and deep work?
To an extent, yes. That's definitely a factor, is like I'm more scared of the blank page than I am of the page with text on it. But I think sometimes I'm kicking myself because I think that new project of ours could be the thing that goes. Like I think it's a really good idea, but we just have not found the space to dedicate anything to it. I mean, okay, here's a lesson. Acknowledging for me that certain parts of the creative process take more energy than others and need more butt in chair time.
Yeah.
And so perhaps my angst over this being the first year in a long time where I haven't created a finished new screenplay, I still don't regret the choices I've made in terms of how I've spent my time. I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with. And maybe that's like a career transition thing.
We also had like post-pandemic transition thing. Like
Yes.
most lockdown city in the world for 2 years. And suddenly it's like, oh, we can go and do things.
But one of the drafts I worked on was paid. The other one was us revisiting an existing project because it actually hopefully has to some extent sprung back to life in terms of the potential of it getting made. So we should focus on that rather than the new shiny thing. And then the podcast is me sort of hip pocketing, like, if everything goes away, I'm still going to fucking make something next year.
Okay, so there's the big difference in our life.
I'm asking a hypothetical here, listen.
I know.
I'm not trying to get Stu to pin down his schedule for me.
Because I'm contractual, I can also be very responsive. So it's very hard for me to plan. I'm very reactive. But so what I have to do is I either have to time block and go, this is absolutely what I'm doing. And it's very space-based. So I think for me, it would be like, I am going to go away.
Well, you've suggested you and I go on a retreat next year to try and get through the next draft of something that we're working on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the change of space. It's forcing it to happen. Will work for me. Okay, and that can work for the new material as well. The thing is, I think part of the cognitive load of writing like a new project is you're throwing a lot of balls in the air. It's the whole juggling thing. And it ends up consuming most of your mind, right?
Yeah. And also, it's just like, it takes me 3 hours to write 3 pages from a blank page. So it just takes a lot of time.
3 hours for 3 pages. That's fast, man.
Okay.
Like most writers that I know are like happy. Like there are writers that are happy with only 3 pages in a whole day as their full-time writing.
Yeah, I query how many of those writers have children, because I feel like when you have children, you just, like, your productivity within narrow windows increases a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can walk around an art gallery and look at them in many amazing paintings and just go, it's kind of less amazing when you think about them having free childcare and free, like, laundry and free domestic service. You know it's true. Not that you do. You are actually a very helpful, mostly helpful.
No, but even so, one of the things I've been struggling with recently is I have 2 magic days a week. I call them magic days because they're days that my kids are in school that I don't have to do my day job. And the day job has been encroaching on that somewhat, and it uses the same brain juice as writing. So if I do an hour of legal work, that kind of almost kills the entire day for me to sit down and start writing. But then also just like life admin has gotten too much, and I'm just finding myself not prioritizing the butt and chair time. And often it needs space. Like, I will focus if I just go out of my house and go to a cafe. I'm more likely to get a good spell of work done than if I stay in the house and I don't get distracted by laundry, deliveries, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not someone who's prescriptive about this. Like, I will go with whatever project's flowing, but I also do know that if I've spent a bit of time away, it takes me some time to get into the flow.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Like, it will take me, because of where my head's at, it will take me a while to get back into writing. Like, I'll need a couple of, like, basically I need to get bored of playing Call of Duty, bored of watching a show. Like, I need to kind of, like, to recover from burnout, I kind of need to go to the other extreme of boredom. It's a gear change, and I think it was easier when you're younger, or maybe you just got less responsibilities. But
all of this is about, I don't know if there's any quote unquote lesson to take from this. It's, I think, time is the most precious resource.
Yeah, and no one can tell you whether it's like, because there's the whole gambler's fallacy, the sunk cost fallacy of working on a script that's not going anywhere, right? But then there's this point, and I think we're with that, it's more that we're existing in the space of like, it's not sunk cost fallacy, but it could be.
One of the things I sunk a lot of time into this year was rewriting a pilot because a producer got attached. And so we created the pitch deck, we got on a graphic designer, did final polishes on the script, and then the producers submitted it to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, like the ABC. And the main premise is it's all about the conflict between a mother and a son. And we only found out 2 months later that the ABC is rebooting a famous iconic Australian show called Mother and Son.
That's right. Oh.
One of the actors in the pitch deck is the actor that they've cast.
Oh my God.
For the mother and son.
Wow. So in all of that, how do you maintain hope?
I put this question in the Trello because this is the third time in my screenwriting career where I've got paid writing coming up next year and the potential for stuff to get made. But the previous 2 times that that's happened, it's all just vanished. And so part of me goes, I should stop being excited about this at all. But then part of me is like, no, I should acknowledge that these are good things and that I'm moving in the right direction and that these are opportunities without counting my chickens is a very Australian. Is it Australian or would that translate? Counting your chickens before your eggs have hatched?
Yeah.
Is that the saying?
I don't know if it sounds just like rural.
Anyway, how do you maintain hope?
The question is it maintaining hope or is it how do you avoid despair? You know, before I got into film, I was more into music. I wrote a whole album when I was in high school. It's terrible. I should put some links in the show notes. And I did music and film in my undergrad, right? It ended up just kind of fading out of my life as something that I did. It's not like I made an active choice to stop writing music. There may be a point where I'm like going to pull out a synthesizer and bang out some synthwave or something. So part of me is like, there is this point where it could come into generating new material. I wonder if there's writers and I could be one of them. It's like, the last new script I wrote was 5 years ago. Like I'm just tinkering and maintaining the scripts that I have, but I'm not generating anything new. So I guess to me that these topics are related, that hope is kind of like, hope is an active thing, right? Hope is, for me, it's not just a feeling of optimism. It's actually pursuing and being active. And so to be active requires conscious choice. And so it's like, I'm going to work on the new thing and just assessing. I think we've got good processes. We, with our writers group, do a quarterly. We only ended up doing it like 3 times this year. We skipped one, but we do a quick accountability as part of our workshops every fortnight. Did and do. I did this and I do. Next week, I'm going to do that. Did not achieve the thing. Do it next week. But like they're processes for creating action. And then you can sit there and do the Steve Jobs thing of if so many weeks have gone by and nothing is changing, you need to ask yourself if, it's the whole thing, if nothing is changing, what needs to change? And so for me, it's like maintaining hope is less about maintaining optimism. Because I think you can feel despair or you can but what I want to avoid is disinterest. Or maybe when the disinterest comes, that's when I know it's over. To
paraphrase you, so in my mind, I often separate hope being an emotion and the actions that arise from being hopeful. I'm going to keep working and writing on projects because I hope still. I'm not despairing. I'm not quitting, right? But it sounds like what you're saying is if you have processes that keep the actions hope in place, then either hope will come or it's irrelevant whether you feel it or not.
Yeah, they're correlated. It's that feeling of the by doing the action, you'll end up feeling hopeful. But that's for me. That's like my experience of depression, and I've have been that it comes from a lack of, like, for better word, lack of stimulation, like a feeling of trapped or inertia, right? That's when I feel the most despairing. So the way I avoid that is by taking action and kind of move forward and not getting stuck in loops and stuff like that, right? So that's the personal thing for me. So I guess that's how I relate to that.
I mean, to me, like with this year, I'm mentally planning for neither of these things to come about because that is leaving me more emotionally well defended for these things to fall apart.
Of course.
But I don't want that to come across in how I act or interact, in pitch meetings or other meetings and stuff like that.
It sounds like what you're saying is you don't want to feel upset if things don't happen, but you want to act with the confidence as if they are.
Yes. Which is something that I feel like Americans are way better at than Australians. There's something cultural there.
There is definitely some cultural stuff. Like Americans are way more accepting of like the hustle and the idea that people are hustling and have side. Oh yeah, of course you've got a day job and doing your hustle. Like I find, whenever I go to LA and it's self-selective, the kind of people that we hang out with when we go to LA and all that stuff are going to be in that zone. But it definitely feels like it's a lot more understanding of like, of course you're going to be doing your hustle and you got your day job, but that's just what you have to do, as opposed to in Australia. It's like, when are you giving up on this? I mean, maybe it was like a year or two after I graduated from the VCA. My sister was like, so when do you think you'll stop with this film stuff?
It's been a while since then.
Well, I mean, my nephew just graduated and he's about to do engineering. And I'm like, I hope you do well at engineering because I'm going to need to borrow money from you. So
Oh, my brother has said he'll fund one of my movies when he cashes out of his stocks in his engineering business.
Wow. Can he cash them out sooner rather than later?
Sadly, no. He is not in control as to when they vest.
All right. Speaking of vesting, do you want to cover any of like the big lesson from craft or career from this year? Any kind of thing that's kind of resonated that we've done?
I'm happy to hear your take on it. I cannot think of anything that's feels like it's been a slow osmotic absorption rather than I can think like, oh, I made a quantum leap in this understanding or in this area of my writing.
I particularly liked our episodes on genre, right? I keep on coming and thinking a lot about like the conventions of genre and how that leads to creation of meaning and the patterns that we see and how we invert patterns. It's just because I watched it last night, The Riders of Justice. What's so interesting about it is that one shift of, it's not the one shift, but it taking dadcore and making it an ensemble kind of changes the meaning of the film, right? And so I think that's really, like, I want to become stronger of being in more control of that, but I think that's really useful. And this will lead us into Andor, because it's not something that I've got a very specific lesson about, but it's like, I want to know how you do it, which is, in the biopics, we talked about the biopics were kind of effective because the characters acted like the stakes existed for them, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, I think we criticized it in the episode Keobi, that Keobi never really acted like he was in danger, right? Like he acted as if he had plot armor on. And what's interesting about Andor is that Andor does not act as if no one acts as if they've got plot armor on. And what is fascinating, because there was a great line, I'm slightly paraphrasing the quote, but it was like, how do you maintain tension or whatever it is about writing a prequel to Tony Gilroy? And it's like, well, we're all living a prequel. We all know we're going to die, right? It's going to happen at some point.
I mean, okay, here's a piece of screenwriting education advice. Because Tony Gilroy is on the fucking media cycle at the moment, there is so many incredible podcasts with him out at the moment where he's ostensibly talking about Andor, but he also talks about everything else. So he was on WTF. He's been on various times, the Q&A podcast with Jeff Goldsmith. Like, there's a lot of great writing advice from Tony Gilroy out there at the moment.
Yeah, so your time is better spent listening to him than us. Okay, so let's start. What did you like about Obi-Wan Kenobi show?
I like that the show is the idea of what do we do where we take this guy who is one of two known Jedis left in the entire galaxy. He's lost his entire community. He's lost his entire way of life. And frankly, he would be blaming himself because he fucking made Darth Vader, or Darth Vader grew under his tutelage, unchecked and unnoticed. And I love that they take that from that place to a point where he can forgive himself enough to actually re-engage. And I like that they measured that with his ability to see Qui-Gon was going, you have now stopped beating yourself up about this. And I liked the really great moment in the whole season is when he and Darth Vader fight and Darth Vader says, you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did. Like, not only does it feed into the nostalgia of that line from A New Hope, but to me, it really acted in the emotional journey that Obi-Wan was on.
Yeah, actually, I would say that line was pretty great. Not only does it make that line better, but it's actually Vader saying, how dare you have the arrogance to think you did this?
Yeah.
I did this. It's actually a great inversion because it's like you narcissist to think this is your fault.
So those are the things I liked. I did actually really enjoy sassy little Leia. I was just struggling so much with the fact that in A New Hope, Leia has clearly never met Obi-Wan ever before.
Oh, you may remember, this is Leia. You may remember me from my father fighting in the Clone Wars, not like...
Remember that time we went on a 6-month fucking adventure together? So that's where you've got like prequel issues, but then you're also talking about, I think the plot armor side of things is the scale of the set pieces that they undertook in Kenobi is very different to the scale of the set pieces that they do in Andor.
Yeah.
So we could say that Cassian feels just as afraid doing the heist on Adani as Obi-Wan feels trying to rescue Leia from the Inquisitor base. But it just feels of such a different scale of one dude walking alone into a base full of Sith Lords or Inquisitors plus Darth Vader and everyone else. It just felt like of a scale where it's like that's what made it feel like plot armor, not his fear or anything like that. It was just like the scale of what they were undertaking.
I think that is a good point. It's scale. It's the palpability of the threat against him and the way he acts. Basically, don't they do the let's just walk out together at the end? Like, it felt, because it felt like that they could succeed, the characters didn't have to work hard in order to succeed, right? Like in Andor, they literally take like almost 2 episodes to plan the heist and then do the heist. And because the amount of time and effort and training the characters are spending in it makes us go, these guys are really scared that they're going to fail. Obi-Wan looks at that base and like, oh, I put on my robe and just walks in.
Yeah.
Right. And walks out. So it feels like he may be scared, but there's nothing in his actions or how he's approaching it that makes us feel that he considers himself actually under genuine risk.
Or the amount of time like Cass spends in the jail plotting his escape as well. You know, it feels like they've been in there for months doing it, not just like, I'm going to walk into the base.
So actually let's unpick this. I think maybe it's more that it's what plot armor is actually, it means that it's plot light, that they don't have to, because they know the character is going to succeed. The plotting is more elliptical.
Yeah.
Right? And they put less pressure on the character. So it's not like that. I mean, there is plot armor like, oh, I get up and there's not a scratch on me. But then there's the plot armor of what we're describing here, which is that Obi-Wan doesn't seem to act if he's under genuine threat, because it feels like the writers are not putting him under genuine threat, and therefore he's not taking action. If plot is character over time, or if it's the actions that the characters take, if you don't put them under enough pressure, right, if you don't give them enough obstacles or stakes, then they're not going to take actions that are appropriate to that. And you feel like you can be like, oh yeah, it's some Sith, but they're not, like, we don't have to spend much time doing that.
But even the culmination of that whole show was in Tatooine, the Inquisitor kidnapping Luke, and Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru fighting off the Inquisitor, and Obi-Wan coming to save them. You know that every single one of those characters except the Inquisitor live. There is zero tension from a plot perspective in that scene. Whereas if we look at what they've done with Andor,
it's all the supporting characters.
They're surrounding him with people that you're making you invest time in loving. Right, like that march through Ferrix, that protest, you're like, all of these people could die. So it's not just plot armor, it's the amount like in Kenobi, he was surrounded by known characters. It wasn't just Kenobi, who we know survives.
I think that was true. I think that sequence was slightly more successful in terms of building tension. I would say that Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru definitely acted more like they thought they were under genuine threat, right? Unlike the earlier episodes. So I feel like what you're saying is true, but in terms of my thesis, like, well, once you've rewatched anything, it loses tension because we know that these characters live, right?
But they were at least preparing to die for Luke.
Yeah, but imagine if they introduced earlier a character on the farm that wasn't Uncle Owen or Aunt Beru.
Then we would all be like, that character's going to die.
And then, it creates some tension, right? Yeah. I mean, obviously, Andor has that genius that they surrounded. And even Mon Mothma, the question isn't whether Mon Mothma will survive, it's at what cost.
Yeah.
Right? And we're beginning to see what that cost is with her daughter and all that stuff.
And her sister. Yeah. And her husband and her planet.
I mean, the whole theme of the show is what cost rebellion? What is the cost of rebellion? I mean, that was Rogue One, but they're doing such a better job of it.
I mean, so again, going back to things I liked about Kenobi, because Reva was a new character, the Inquisitor, and I had no idea whether she would live or die, I really liked her journey of basically trying to be a successful Inquisitor so she can get close enough to Darth Vader to kill him. And then was aware of it the whole time and just dispatches her so summarily.
Yeah, that was pretty clever.
There are some really great ideas in there. It's just that because most of the show was him and Leia and then him protecting Luke, it just
it was less than the sum of the parts. Like, I think Ewan McGregor in the role of Obi-Wan is great. He I do like him starting off as, I don't want to use the Force, him becoming more confident about it. The idea of Sassy Leia ignoring the slight retconning, but they were definitely in a weird place where definitely, I agree with the set piece. This felt a lot more scaled down than Andor. It may be to do with them shooting in the volume. Like people have tried to be like, oh, that's because they weren't shooting on location and limited by the volume. But it also could be kind of a lack of ambition in terms of the visuals. I mean, I was excited to see the Inquisitor base in live action, but it felt like it was so easy for him to get in and get out. You know, even the Deus Ex Machina of the others like flying in at the last minute.
Weirdly, we're focusing on one thing when that was just one episode in the whole season, but it was like building like that was a kind of climax that it was building towards. Like, you know, it was so awesome when Vader fucking grabs that ship and rips its hull open. And then the other one gets up and flies off. And my wife, who has watched a lot of Star Wars, enjoys Star Wars, she's like, why didn't he grab that ship?
Everything felt a little bit too easy.
Not enough consistency. I mean, there were a lot of people after the episode where Vader and Obi-Wan had confronted each other for the first time. Then Obi-Wan gets away because there's fire in between him and Vader. It's like, why doesn't Vader just like jump over it or pull Obi-Wan towards? Like there was just some inconsistencies about Vader's power. Like
plot armor is actually more inhibiting the riders.
Yeah.
But they're kind of like weirdly going softer on the characters rather than going harder.
Yeah.
They're not doing the Breaking Bad of like, how do we write our character into the corner and how do we then write them getting out of it?
Well, I thought one of the cool things was that where Obi-Wan refuses to help that young Jedi on Tatooine, where it's a combination of like, I've quote unquote got a mission, but really I'm just too scared and don't want anyone to know I'm here. I don't want to fight anymore.
Yeah.
Like that was cool. He was forced into a choice. Do I let this young, foolish, reckless person die? Or do I save him but potentially expose myself and Luke? And
I mean, the thematic question what is the thematic question, Obi-Wan?
To me, it was about survivor's guilt and that's what it's trying to be, is coming to terms with survivor's guilt. But it didn't do enough of that.
Yeah, because in some ways, it's not the Ninth Sister, but the sister, the Inquisitor, that's about her. She's a survivor and she's turned to the dark side as a result of being a survivor. Yeah, but it doesn't quite do enough with it. Whereas the Andor idea of what cost rebellion is something that affects all the characters.
I mean, whenever there's no Jedi in Star Wars, it's so much better. But I like, for anyone who hasn't seen Andor, the reason Stu and I, obviously, we both love Star Wars, but seriously, Andor to me felt like The Wire. It felt like some of the best TV I've watched all year, almost regardless of the fact that it was set in a Star Wars universe. It was... I can't believe that in this political era, a TV show made by Disney was so overtly anti-fascist and anti-authoritarian.
And anti-corporate.
Anti-corporate, anti-surveillance, anti-incarceration.
Oh, yeah, it's attack on the prison industrial complex. Woo.
Like, I could not believe the balls on that show. So, and obviously that aligns with my politics, but just the bravery to be that political in a fucking Star Wars show seems unbelievable to me. But it was about molding Cassian from this person who I still think, even I struggled with the early episodes. Watched them every week as they came out, so obviously didn't struggle too much. But I was really trying to find out, like, get a grip on who Cassian was, and I still don't think I've got a very clear idea on who he was coming into the show.
You're not the only one that feels that Cassian is the least interesting part of the show.
He became more interesting as soon as he was recruited. Like, as soon as there were plot missions that he could be of service to, he became more interesting. But in the beginning, he seemed to be getting in his own way.
Well, I mean, and they've dropped the whole sister thing for now. He was motivated to find his sister, and then suddenly it's like, wait, what?
For like an episode.
Yeah. So determined to find his sister, except now. So it'd be interesting to see whether they bring that back. But I mean,
but even his relationship to Bix, like, and his relationship to, I don't even know the character's name, but the big, tall, like, mining dude. I don't understand why he likes Cassian at all.
Yeah, okay. So it's one of those characters where they have friends, but we don't understand why those friends are friends with them.
Because a lot of stuff has clearly happened in backstory that we don't have access to.
Yeah. Do they like him because they actually like his mother? My whole quip was Andor's actually not named after Cassian, it's named after his mother, right? Like, his value to the rebellion is actually the fact that he's connected to his mother. Not just his skills, but his symbolic power is actually the fact that his mother is probably actually going to become a folk hero.
Oh, I mean, we can keep gushing about Andor, but it took its time. Even though we know Cass survives, it surrounds Cassian with a whole lot of completely unknown characters that
whose fates are unknown.
Yeah.
But I don't think, like, Cassian is constantly put in positions where he doesn't seem to know how to get out, and nothing is easy for him.
And he puts himself in positions where has even said, like, it's better to die trying than to just survive being under their yoke. You know, and then there's just all these wonderful, heartbreaking moments around him, like the Andy Serkis character not being able to swim. In a weird kind of way, Cassian in that first season has less of a character journey than everyone around him, but he's facilitating, or he's part of, like, that character, the Andy Serkis character, goes from being an enabler of the system of control to being the figurehead of overthrowing it.
Yeah. What I like about the show is it's clear that Cassian isn't a leader in that sense. Like, he is an enabler, he gets shit done, but I think the show is very good at articulating that he is not the leader, like, he's not the Che, he is not the face of the rebellion, but he is someone who's going to get it done, and he enables other people to be leaders. And I really like that. They're not trying to make him everything. They're not trying to be like, he's not going to be the one giving he gives a speech, but the speech isn't necessarily a great speech. It's an effective speech to get people to do what he needs.
And I mean, every time we see the recap, when we see the young kid with the manifesto that we talked about in Talismans, whenever we see him die, because it shows that every recap is like, oh, that little kid.
Oh. I wonder if it's also better because it's not like, will Andor survive? But it's like, we know Andor will survive. It's the outcome of the plot question is directly related to the thematic question.
Yeah. And there are more thematic scenes in that show.
Yeah.
Than in Kenobi. Like the scene between Luthen and his mole in the ISB up on that gangplank, that's not there for any reason other than to get Luthen to say what rebellion has cost him.
Yeah.
That he'll never be a hero. He has resorted to their methods to beat them. He is a compromised, by his own value system, he considers himself evil.
It's not just theme, it's theme and character. It's revealing the fact that he is willing, when he discovers that his mole, like he is going to have to let these men die. And then what is the pay? But yes, that speech is for the audience.
Yeah. But you didn't, for plot reasons, you did not need that scene or that character.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like, his source comes and tells him, and he just needs to say well, fuck, I'm going to have to let them die now. And the guy being like, what?
Or you ignore all of that. Like, it doesn't move the plot along of the overarching show. It's not to say that it's not hugely important.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it's a D plot.
Yeah.
Where you don't even meet the guy that he's sacrificing, who's attacking that power station. It's a show that knows what it's about, that even though we know that one character survives, that means it has the luxury of imperiling other characters, but also the scale of it. Like, what I love about it is it's so banal. Like, it's from Ferrix is this tiny little mining town.
Great architecture, though.
Yeah. And then he goes to,
Space Florida,
gets arrested on the beach, and then goes to jail. It's a great, great show.
Okay. It actually comes, this was not something we've directly talked about in this podcast, but something I've been thinking about a lot this year, and it started last year, but it connects to stuff about character and Andor and the importance of having thematic scenes. It's also something I've been thinking about is the importance of having scenes of characters by themselves. So it's just the audience and the character. I actually think can be a really effective way for the audience to connect with character.
I'm writing in the schedule right now.
What?
Characters by themselves.
Oh, in terms of episodes. Yeah, I mean, that hopefully would be a very short episode because it's like, here's 5 movies where we see these moments of characters by themselves and we kind of project into them and we kind of project emotion into them. But I think it actually makes the audience feel more connected with the character. It's
not just characters by themselves. It's characters by themselves in scenes where usually it's not plot. It's not like the character is like defusing the bomb by themselves, right? It is.
It's
just time with characters sitting
the plot
with themselves.
Yeah. It's where they're almost letting their mask down. Like, we feel that we're seeing a side of the character that they wouldn't show anyone else. It's the moment of Darth Vader, keeping in Star Wars, having his helmet put back on before he has to go outside. So you get that moment of him, you know, like us seeing that, oh, he's a monster on the side, and there's some kind of, you know, scar or whatever.
But, I mean, that scene, what I love about that, and it's such a throwaway moment, it's Empire, isn't it, where you first see him, it also means he wants to take the helmet off. And he has to wear it all the time. Like, it actually, that scene makes me feel sorry for him, not go, oh, he's a disgusting monster under the helmet.
Why not both?
Yeah, it could be both.
All right, speaking of both, is there any key lessons and wrap-up from Backmatter? No?
No, probably not from Backmatter. I still think the scale thing, what makes Andor work is how small scale it is. That doesn't mean it's not tense. That doesn't mean it's not important. But it's just made such an incredible show by not being epic.
Yeah, it feels more epic because it's dealing with stuff that's literally life and death for the whole universe.
Do you have any learnings from Backmatter?
I am correct.
That's your takeaway every year.
Yes. All right. This episode is being brought to you pretty much just by our Patreons, so thank you, Patreons. Particularly, and especially Casimir, Eduardo, Jennifer, Garrett, Bjorn, Randy, Jesse, Sandra, Theus, Alex, and Crob. Thank you for being supporters of the podcast. Some of you for a very long time, right? Like almost since the doors opened. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. Thank you to all our Patreons. Please consider becoming a Patreon or tipping us on using the Linktree PayPal account or buying some merch. It is possibly Christmas, just being Christmas. Hope you had a good Christmas. I just realized.
Stu was supposed to edit this and get this out before Christmas. I'm pretty sure he'll get it out before New Year's.
Well, I haven't specified the year.
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-0.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.